Yes, good evening. On behalf of the Cambridge Climate Emergency Action Group, which is sponsoring tonight's forum, I want to tell you a few words about Cambridge Climate Change Week. This forum is the keynote, as Tim's noted, the keynote event for the week that includes many events. The Action Group was formed to carry on the work of the Cambridge Climate Congress of 100 residents that was convened jointly by then Mayor Denise Simmons and a grassroots coalition of citizens in 2009 and 2010, early 2010. In the past 3 months, numerous other organizations and dozens of individuals have pitched in to organize the impressive program of events planned for Climate Change Week, which you can see listed in your program. I do want to say, in addition to the sponsors already mentioned by Tim, I also would like to thank the former Wainwright Bank, now Eastern Bank, for its contributions to making Climate Change Week possible. They're not specifically a sponsor for this event, but they've been a great help. The list of events planned for the week is testimony to the broad support in our community for the cause of climate security. This outpouring of support comes not from our skill as organizers, but from people's deep belief in the cause and their growing awareness that it is an urgent one. Climate stability, climate security, is one of humanity's most ancient concerns. It is essential for agriculture, and it figures prominently in the biblical account of creation. Now, as everyone who has paid attention for any length of time knows, seed time and harvest are shifting. Flowers are blooming much earlier in the spring than only a couple of decades ago. Unmistakable evidence that the climate is changing, and the impacts on people around the world are mounting. The story of these impacts will be the subject of an event in Climate Change Week, the Witnesses of Climate Change Forum, on the program for next Tuesday evening. It will include first-person accounts by people on 4 continents of how changes in the climate have already affected them. What can citizens in Cambridge do to help stop climate change now that it is underway and seems certain to continue for many years? This is the subject of the week's Action Fest finale that will be held next Sunday, with informational booths on what people in Cambridge are doing to reduce their carbon footprint, on advocacy for government and corporate policies that will actually help to stop climate change, and opportunities to join with others to help build a mandate for these policies. Central to what we as individual citizens must do to help stabilize the climate is to reduce the carbon footprint of the things we consume and use. Tonight's forum looks at whether some of the popular solutions for climate change in the marketplace live up to their promise. And now, here is our moderator, Tim Weiskell, to introduce the program and our speaker.
Thank you, John, and thanks for the chairing of this committee and the forthcoming events. This is going to be quite a week of citizen involvement here. Okay, welcome to Cambridge Forum, discussing climate change. Is green consumption a solution? With environmental writer Heather Rogers. I'm Tim Weiskell, a member of the Forum's board and an honorary member of the Cambridge Climate Emergency Action Group. Honorary because the people that do the work deserve the credit, not the honorary. The search for solutions to climate change, that is, measures that might actually help to stabilize the climate and restore climate security, that search has led in recent years to a vast range of consumer products, from energy-efficient light bulbs and solar panels to cars, not just hybrids, and even brands of gasoline with or without ethanol. All are advertised as green or eco-friendly. Haven't gotten the difference between eco and eco-friendly. But in any case, to the point, so much has been added that the green label has been stripped of its fundamental meaning, unless it just is to indicate a sales pitch. What are people who wish to be responsible consumers really do? One option, of course, is simply to consume less, period. An alternative would be to buy only those products and services that do protect climate stability, or at least do not contribute to global warming. Do such products exist? And how can consumers find accurate information about the climate impact of their purchases? The carbon footprint, as it were, isn't printed on the label. Our speaker, Heather Rogers, has investigated some of the most prominent and complex green consumption solutions and has reported her findings in her current book, Green Gone Wrong: How Our Economy is Undermining the Environmental Revolution. And this serves as the basis for our discussion this evening. Heather Rogers is a journalist and author. Her articles have appeared in the New York Times Magazine, Mother Jones, and The Nation. Her book, Gone Tomorrow: The Hidden Life of Garbage, traces the history and politics of household rubbish in the United States. That book received the Editor's Choice distinction from the New York Times Book Review and the nonfiction choice from the Guardian newspaper in the United Kingdom. Her documentary film, also entitled Gone Tomorrow, screened in festivals around the globe. She speaks internationally on the environmental effects of mass consumption and has recently been a senior fellow at the progressive U.S. think tank, Demos. Welcome to Cambridge Forum, Heather Rogers.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, that's fine with me. Thank you so much for coming tonight, and I really want to thank the Cambridge Climate Emergency Action Group for bringing me here, and to John Pitkin, who I've been corresponding with for several weeks now. So thank you very much, and also to the Climate Justice Task Force. It's great to get to speak in this place. It's really wonderful. And I look forward to the discussion with everybody that's here. What this week is about, I don't know if everybody has checked out the activities, but there's a lot of really great things that are coming up. And one of the things that I always, at the end of the talks that I do, there's always a discussion of, okay, well, what do we do, And this is one of the things I always say, get involved in your community and figure out what makes sense to you and how you can, do something, somehow engage with these issues in a way that is meaningful to you. And that's exactly what the people in the Cambridge Climate Emergency Action Group are doing. They recently came together and they're making things happen. And I just think that's a really wonderful thing that all of us can do in whatever form, makes sense to us. So I just really want to salute them for their efforts and their interest and engagement. That's what, I kind of think that's what life is all about. And just a couple other thoughts about the week. As John said, they're bringing people, witnesses of the real impacts of climate change. And these people are coming because, John and his colleagues want to help make real the very abstract phenomena of climate change. It's just so abstract. How do you make it real? How do you understand it in a way that, in some ways motivates you, Because I mean, I don't have to tell you how hard it is to understand even what it's like for the people who are dealing with the flooding in, the Mississippi flooding. I mean, I hear it, I see pictures of it, but I just have no idea what it's really like. Not to mention the earthquake and the meltdown in Japan, So there's this kind of stuff going on all the time, and it's so hard for us to understand it when we're not living it. And so these efforts, bringing these people over is such a great way to try to bridge that gap. And I think people really do want to do that. I think people want to make what is abstract concrete. I think that's something that most people I know are motivated to do. And, that is why we have things like green products, because people want to know they want to know the provenance of the things that they consume. They want to know, that's why the rise of there's been such an increase in fair trade also. So there's a real curiosity about, where does the stuff that we use every day come from? How can we be more involved in that? A lot of people say that consumers don't really care that much, and I think they do. And I think that's a big reason why we have these kinds of products, these kinds of green products. But what does it mean when we actually use them and rely on them as a solution to address climate change and other environmental crises? And that's what I look at in my book. So, in terms of the things that I cover in the book, I look at food, shelter, and transportation. So it's a very broad scope. And I'm going to just sort of touch on some of those things tonight, and then we'll have plenty of time to get into more, so feel free to ask follow-up questions. I want to start, because I think this is something that everybody can relate to, I want to start with food, one of my favorite subjects. And I spent time with, and just to frame it a little bit more, these kinds of solutions, one of the reasons that we're told that they work and that they're good, and that, if we replace, dirty products with clean ones, we'll transform our economy into a green economy. If we all demand organic food and hybrid cars and biofuels, or, maybe not biofuels these days, but if we demand these kinds of products, then manufacturers will have to oblige, and they'll have to make a transformation, and then we will get there. So the market is the most efficient mechanism to get us to where we need to go. And I'm really interrogating that, because I'm not sure I'm not convinced that that's the case. And I think it's really important to explore it. So what I did was I looked at, organic food has been growing double-digit growth rates for organic food in the last 20 years, last 15, 20 years, except for 2009, but then it went right back up in 2010. It was because of the recession. The logic is like, okay, it's growing, therefore we should be seeing, environmental improvements. Well, what's happening is the logic of the market is that there's this greater demand, so there has to be more sourcing of organic food and inputs, raw materials from the United States only has 7% of the world's organic farmland. So we have to source it from outside the country. Everybody here has probably heard of food miles. Well, I wanted to find out what happens, not just, the impacts of the transit of that food, but what happens on the ground where that food is grown. And I went to South America, I went to Paraguay and spent time on a organic sugar plantation and mill, and they produce a third of all the organic sugar that's consumed in the United States. They sell to the company that makes Silk soy milk, and General Mills, which owns Muir Glen, and a couple other organic brands. So the sugar is sort of everywhere. And what they're doing essentially to expand their organic cropland to meet this greater demand is they're deforesting. And that's not what people have in mind when they look for the organic seal. So these are the kinds of potential outcomes that can, it can sort of backfire on us. And the other side of the food situation is I spent time with some small, holistic, beyond organic farmers in New York, in upstate New York. And what I found there is while they know how to farm in ways that are environmentally sustainable, what the block is that doing that kind of farming is not economically sustainable. So even though they charge exorbitant amounts often, not all the time, but even though a lot of the food that you get at the farmer's market can be very expensive, those farmers often are not earning enough money to buy the very food that they grow and sell. And this is something that really gets overlooked, and it's crucial. If we want this kind of farming to work, people have to get paid a living wage so that they can do it, and so they can continue doing it. So those are just a couple issues related to food. And then I'm going to talk briefly about biofuels and carbon offsetting. And biofuels, I think probably most people here know about biofuels, yes? A little show of hands, yeah? Okay, yeah. So I went to Borneo in Indonesia, where deforestation rates are incredibly high, so high, deforestation rates in Indonesia, which is one of the last large remaining rainforests on the planet. Deforestation rates in the country are so high that it's made Indonesia the world's third largest CO2 emitter globally, after China and the US, just from deforestation. So one of the main driving factors in the deforestation there is the expansion of cropland for palm oil trees, which is used to make, oil palm trees, which are used to make palm oil. Palm oil is most often used in processed food and as vegetable oil, but is more and more being used to make biodiesel. And, I spent time in this village in the middle of Borneo and saw this illegal deforestation that was going on in their land, essentially driving them out of the forest. And the Dayak, indigenous Dayak community that I met, really, they're trying to address the situation through the formal channels, and none of it is working. None of the government, the local government, regional, national government, they don't respond, and the corporation that's doing this deforestation won't respond. And so they're sort of left, just to try to stay on their land however they can, and the balance of power is incredibly lopsided. The company that's deforesting the land is a company called Duda Palma, and Duda Palma sells its oil to another company called Wilmar, and Wilmar is partially owned by Archer Daniels Midland. So there's all these connections, that are there. And so, just a quick story from Indonesia. And this gives you a sense of how it actually happens on the kind of capillary level. It's not always, I always imagine the kind of clear cutting going on where, just these big corporations just show up with an army of bulldozers. And it actually doesn't happen that way, at least in this case. I was in the village one night, and there was it's about 60 families in the village, and it's on the side of a river, really remote. I had to take a truck and a boat and a motorcycle to get there. And we're sitting in the head of the village, Momonus, we're sitting in his wife Margareta, we're sitting in their home. They have no furniture, we're just sitting on the floor. And all these men from the village come in, and there's no electricity. We're sitting in candlelight drinking tea, and they're telling me about the deforestation. And about 2/3 of the way through the meeting, Momonus asks if anyone's been out to the edge of the forest where the deforestation had been going on. And this one guy raises his hand and says, yeah, I was there recently, and all the deforestation has stopped. And, okay. So then the next morning we get up, and Momonus takes me out to the edge of the forest to show me where this has been happening. About 15,000 acres have been cleared. And we're not talking small potatoes. It's a lot of land. And they're hunter-gatherers, so it has a tremendous impact on their lives. And so we go out there, and we're on motorcycles, and there's a couple of the guys from the village with us and my translator, and we come upon an illegal chainsaw crew. And it's just these guys are cutting the trees down, and we can hear more chainsaws from the forest. So Momonus gets off the bike, and he goes back into the forest, comes back about 10 minutes later, and he's talking to the guys from the village, and a few minutes after that, another man comes rolling toward us on a pretty new white motorcycle. And Momos turns around, and he sees the guy, and he looks at us, and he was like, "Get on the bikes, we have to go." And so we do, and then when we finally stop, I was like, "What happened?" And he said, the guy who was on the motorcycle, he was the guy at the meeting last night who said he'd been out here and that nothing was going on. And this guy is Margaretta's brother. It's his brother-in-law. So this is just, this shows you how it works, how the kind of deforestation happens. It tears communities apart in ways, in really deep, profound ways. And, that's so often the case with these kinds of solutions. I think people are more critical of biofuels. It's gotten a lot more publicity and press and media coverage. But something like carbon offsets is also, I think a lot of people in the room are pretty critical of carbon offsetting, but there are similar kind of granular level social impacts that it has that hardly ever get talked about. And I want to talk about some of those as well as the environmental impacts. But does anybody not know what carbon offsets are? I can do an explanation really quick. Okay, I'll do a quick explanation. So basically, this is a service that's offered to individuals and businesses and industries. And what it is you can theoretically buy offsets to make up for carbon that you or your company emits. So on an individual level, I can go onto a website of a carbon offset company like the Carbon Neutral company or My Climate, which is a Swiss-based company, and I can say, I want to cancel out the CO2 emissions from a flight that I took from Los Angeles to Boston. And the site will say, it's going to cost you $15 to do that. So I pay my $15. It goes into a pool with everyone else's money, and it gets sent to subsidize a project. There's essentially two kinds of carbon offset projects. One is trying to absorb carbon that's already been emitted, which is most often tree planting projects. And then there are other projects that just don't emit carbon in the first place. And an example of that is a carbon neutral power plant. So something that burns plant material that only emits as much carbon as it absorbed over its lifespan. So I went to India where a lot of carbon offset projects are being implemented. Most carbon offset projects are implemented in developing countries because it's land and labor cheaper. And there are some other political reasons as well, but China has the most carbon offset projects, and then India is a fast second behind them. And so I went to southern India, the state of Karnataka, and I went to several different carbon offset projects. And the one that I'm going to tell you about is a carbon offset project that is a carbon neutral power plant. And it's in a farming region, mostly landless peasants. They grow sugarcane, coconut palm, and rice for the most part. And the way that the power plant works is that they use, it's a My Climate project. And on the website, the page for the project is really, there's this line, I should have written it down, but hilarious because in a tragic way. But it says, we're taking the crop waste, they call it crop waste, the rice straw, the sugarcane leaves, the dead palm fronds. We're taking the pollution, these substances are polluting the land. So we're taking them and we're putting them to good use, and we're keeping them from doing environmental harm, which is totally ridiculous. What's happening is that they are generating electricity by burning, carbon neutral material. There are a number of issues with, the idea that those materials are carbon neutral, yes, but when you burn the carbon all at once, you're releasing the carbon immediately, and that's not what would normally happen if they were left to decay on their own. And just quickly, there's a couple other basic issues with carbon offsetting. A lot of people, scientists, will say you can't really offset carbon. The only way to offset carbon is to just not produce it. So it's a kind of fantastical notion that I will humor for the next few minutes. So at this power plant, it's in this farming region, and there are a number of villages around the power plant. And I spent time in one village called Hagur. I went to a couple different villages, but I spent most of my time in this one. And what I found, the company that runs the power plant and My Climate, and this power plant has the top third-party certification. It's called the gold standard. It's got, if you wanted to buy a carbon offset, you would probably decide to invest your money here because it looks great. It meets all the criteria. It's got social value. It's got environmental value. And one of the social benefits of this project was that it was going to create, says that it creates jobs, and not only in the power plant, but it creates all kinds of peripheral jobs for women. And my kind of main contact in the village of Hagur was this woman, Amma, who has 2 children and a husband, and they all live in a room that's very small. And about that size, it's about a 20 by 10 room. And she told me, and I went and spent a lot of time looking and talking to women and interviewing other women about the jobs that were supposed to be coming from this, and they just didn't exist. There was nobody had even ever heard of. It was women's self-help groups, and they were supposed to be selling the ash waste. They were composting it and turning it into fertilizer and then selling it. And these women said that it just didn't exist. And when I talked to the company, they indeed said, no, it doesn't exist. So there's those kinds of promises that have not been kept but are continuing to be advertised. And then there are these other questions that come up, like when you remove that material from the farm, you're taking away nutrients that have to be replaced. And how are those being replaced? They're being replaced by farmers buying fertilizer. So they're having now to get their nutrients from off the farm. They're having to pay for the nutrients from off the farm. So that changes their economic situation. The workers, like I said, most of the people there are landless peasants. The men make $2 a day, the women make $1, $1.50 a day, working in the fields. And the farmer, the landowners, most of them are very small landowners and they don't make much more. So it's definitely changes their economic situation. Now the people that earn the day wages, they make fires every day, and they often use like the palm fronds, the dead palm fronds, to make fires. They're now having to buy firewood. So Amma, the woman that I stayed with, she makes fires multiple times a day for cooking and cleaning, and she has to buy firewood now. So it changes her economic reality pretty substantially. And more trees are getting cut down to sell to people as firewood. Another guy that I met said that he has land, and he said that he, from time to time, will go and cut trees down to sell directly to the power plant when he needs money. And he says he knows other people who do the same thing. So there's this kind of environmental, unintended consequence that's happening as well. And one other thing, those materials, the palm fronds and the sugarcane leaves are also used. There are a lot of very poor people who live out there that build shelters. They build their housing with those materials. And they're having now to buy like tarps and things, they're also having to spend money and earn money, earn more money in ways that they haven't had to before. And there's silkworm farms. And so in the village of Hagur, Amma's brother and his wife have a silkworm farm. And it's really amazing. I'd never seen one before. But they make the screens where the worms spin the silk out of the sugarcane leaves. So there's all kinds of ways that these materials are part of the fabric of life there, of the culture, and of the livelihoods. And so this is sort of turning that on its head. And those are things that are just really, really hard to see and hard to anticipate from your computer in Boston when you're like clicking on the offset my carbon now button. And I think those are important stories to tell. The other thing about carbon offsetting in this specific situation is that there's this requirement called additionality. So if you're going to offset your carbon emissions, if you have if a offset company has a project they want you to invest in, they have to show that that project wouldn't have otherwise happened, because then they're just getting free money, right? That's the only way you can do it. But what that means is that companies like India can't, if they want to get the billions of dollars that they get every year for carbon offset projects, if they want to continue to get that money, they can't adopt a comprehensive renewable energy plan for their country. Individual states can't do it. If they do, they will no longer be eligible for the carbon offset funds. So it actually ends up being a disincentive for a comprehensive program, on the scale that would really have an impact, and a lasting, create a lasting, true infrastructure as these countries, China, India, move into new phases of development and industrialization. So, that's another kind of unintended consequence that is really, it has a very big impact on what happens. And so those are some of the things that I found, and I want to touch on now just some of there's a couple things that are happening this week also. I live in Brooklyn, and so I won't be there, but I was, checking it out, and there's all this great stuff. So a couple of the other things are, there's an exhibition this week at Swissnex, which is the Swiss consulate, and they're doing this exhibition on the 2,000 Watt Society. And I write about that a little bit in my book. And there's also a demonstration at some point. Somebody's talking about passive house architecture. And I write about that a lot in my book. So I want to talk about that stuff and sort of end with that, and then we could have our discussion. But I went to Germany. I went to the town of Freiburg. So here's all this stuff, right? Sounds like it could be good. Go look at it. No, there's a lot of stuff that doesn't work. So what works, right? So I went to the town of Freiburg, and Freiburg has 2 eco-communities in it, sort of eco-neighborhoods. One is called Rieselfeld, the other one is called Vauban. And together, there are 15,000 people living in housing that uses a fraction of the energy that conventional housing uses. And both these neighborhoods have been up and running for over a dozen years. So I wanted to see, like, does it really work? You know, what's it like to stay in these places? I rented an apartment in Vauban and lived there for about 5 days in the middle of the winter, in the middle of a snowstorm. And it wasn't freezing. I was really glad because I hate being cold. And so some of the things I found there, this neighborhood is Vauban. There's about 5,000 people that live there, smaller than Rieselfeld. And it was formed by groups coming together, people in the community deciding that they wanted to build a neighborhood that was environmentally sane. And they created the urban plans for it. They created, like, you know, zoning and building codes and everything that they call also the transportation for the area. They call it the traffic concept, which I love. And so the housing has to be, they call it low energy housing, but most of the housing there uses passive house technology, which is, you know, building materials and methods that are super efficient and use about 1/15 the energy that conventional buildings use. And, you know, they get something like 40% of their heat just from passive solar rays coming in. So if you orient the building, you know, to be south-facing, in the middle of the winter, you know, Freiburg isn't the sunniest place in Germany. You know, it's important to say that, but you know, 40% of your heat coming just from the sun is, you know, pretty great. And what happens when you do that is that you have obviously a much smaller carbon footprint. And this is the kind of, you know, I think most people who think about these issues know that we need to consume less. And when I talk about consuming less, this is what I'm talking about, right? The kinds of houses that these people live in, they look just like the house I live in Brooklyn. They don't look different. They're not, you know, mud huts in the middle of nowhere. You know what I mean? They don't live in caves. They don't, you know, it's not uncomfortable. It's, you know, and part of why I wanted to go to this town was because not only were these neighborhoods up and running, you know, but also, like, Vauban is mixed income. It's not just for rich people who can afford to be green, you know, which is another really big issue when you talk about green products and using the market to create change. Well, if you're, you know, if you're wealthy and you have the disposable income to be green, great. But if you're a working single mother, not so great. So again, that's the kind of waste that I'm talking about that, you know, we don't have to do, and we can still have a really tremendous standard of living. And I think an important point in making in this whole conversation is that, you know, the minute you say, you know, we can only grow so much, growth cannot be what our economy continues to be based on. I'm friends, my sister is friends with a hedge fund kind of genius investor guy. And I was talking to him about 9 months ago, and he even said, you know, the idea that an economy can just keep growing and growing and growing is, it's insane. It doesn't make any sense. You have to get to a point where you start changing and shifting and figuring out how to live differently. So, I mean, if a hedge fund guy can figure that out, I think we should, you know, we should be able to do better than we're doing. But in the minute that you say, you know, it would be good if we grew, you know, if we thought more critically about this idea of the constant need for growth, people freak out. A lot of people freak out. And, you know, when you say we need to consume less, people also freak out. And what I often say is, well, I'm not saying that we have to walk around in smocks and eat gruel, by consuming less. The UN issued a report yesterday that said that a third of all the food produced in the world is wasted. That's the kind of consuming less I'm talking about. Just a couple more things about Vauban. I want to talk about the traffic concept, which is, I think you guys will really appreciate from some of the stuff that I've read about the work that the CCEAG is doing, and I think other people in town too. So basically what they came up with was, there's one other architect that I want to mention before I go into the traffic concept. His name is Rolf Disch, and he's a German architect who practices in Freiburg, and he makes Energy Plus houses. He uses passive house technology, and then he puts solar panels on all of his buildings as the roofing material. And his housing, it's all multifamily housing, and it generates more energy than it uses. And he's a sort of, visionary and very practical architect who does a lot of work. He lives in Freiburg. And just another quick note, a lot of what happened in Freiburg happened because of people's engagement on the level that we've been talking about tonight, like on this, community level of, how can we create a situation in which we make the kind of world that we want to live in, and how can we rely on each other to do that, and how can we teach each other how to do that. And so when the people who started Vauban, they formed a group called Forum Vauban, and they, like I said, came up with this whole plan and continue working on it and continue seeing it as a process. It's not something that's finished, it's an ongoing process. And so just quickly on the traffic thing. Okay, so if you want to have a car in Vauban, they built into the plan mass transit. There wasn't a tram line that went out there. They had to, really fight with the city to get the tram to run out to their neighborhood, and they got it, and it works beautifully. And they built in bike lanes and pedestrian pathways. And so if you want to have a car, there's all this other infrastructure that's really easy to use. Every apartment building has to have bike parking, like covered bike parking right out front. So, but if you really want to have a car, you can. There are 2 parking garages, one at either end of the neighborhood, and you have to park in one of those, so it'll take you 10 minutes to get to your car. And you have to buy a parking spot, which costs $24,000. So you have to really, really, really want a car. So anyway, that was their kind of stroke of genius, and it's worked really well. The rates of car use in Vauban are, needless to say, a fraction of what they are in the rest of the country. But one of the lessons, the kind of main lesson that I learned in Vauban was that it is a process. Getting to greater environmental sustainability is a process. It's not a product that we can buy. And I think that is something, if I could give to you tonight, I would hope that it would be that. Thanks.
You are joining us at Cambridge Forum, listening to Heather Rogers discussing climate change. Is green consumption a solution? I have a question or two that I'll start off with, and then the others can line up at the center mic as they have questions to ask as well. But in looking at this logic of green consumerism, a lot of the rationale for it is sometimes put forward half-heartedly by people who say, oh, I know it's not the solution, but it's going to buy us time. I've been troubled by that over the years, and I would love your insight on this. Buying time for what? And is it possible to buy time with another form of what got us into the problem in the first place.
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I mean, I think the key word in buying time is buying. I think that's the thing that look, when we don't consume with the intensity that the American economy is used to us consuming at, the system falls into crisis. And we see that very clearly with the recession, the ongoing depression, really, at this point. And if we have a system that falls apart when we consume less, that's a system that's really dangerous, And and when you get down to it, this idea of buying time. I mean, there's really this concept. A lot of people believe very strongly that no, you need capitalism and its growth imperative so that we can get to the technology that we need to fix the problems. So it's this kind of amazing logic where it's like, okay, we'll wreck the planet, but we do that so that we can get the development and the smarts that we need to be able to make the technology to fix what we ruined. It's kind of amazing. So yeah, buying time, I think, has a lot to do with not messing with the status quo. And I think it has a lot to do with not making tough choices. And I think it has a lot to do with, I don't know, it's depressing. I mean, dealing with the reality of the situation can be very depressing, and it is disruptive. And, it's hard to do that. I think that there are a lot of power structures that are very scared of things changing. I mean, if we go off of big oil, if we go, big ag, big oil, big coal, those are really powerful interests. And the minute we start to change, they lose their power, and that's not going to come easily. And so, buying time is maybe a code for them buying time.
That's well put. It's a code for keeping alive certain kinds of consumerism, and really not shifting the fundamental assumption toward self-imposed self-restraint. The problem with political systems that are up against collapsing consumerism is that, especially in democracies, there's often a promise of more tomorrow rather than a deliverance on greater equity questions. In other words, the way it's often been put is that democracies can't afford not to grow because they're sustained on the myth of a bigger pie. Have you focused on the political aspects of no-growth economies or even slow-growth economies?
Yeah, I haven't specifically written about no growth or slow growth, and there are a number of people, economists and also activists, who are doing a lot of work on this, important work pioneering this. It's not a new idea. And, it's really, in the work that I've done, I see that there is this possibility of separating out growth from development and, differentiating between us having a good standard of living, having access to health care and education and good food and clean water and comfortable housing. Those are the kinds of things that I believe that we can have, without having an economy that functions the way ours does, that doesn't work if it's not growing at a pretty rapid rate.
Okay, you are listening to Cambridge Forum as we continue our discussion with Heather Rogers as she examines the impact of green consumption on global climate change. The floor is now open for audience questions, and line up at the center as you already have. Sir.
My name is Michael Brower. I've been a resident of Cambridge for over 55 years. I'm glad that toward the end of your talk you mentioned solar panels. don't you think that the city of Cambridge, and in fact every city in the United States, should be strongly promoting the use of solar panels and indeed wind power and geothermal energy as a replacement for our carbon energy? And every city, state government, why not the federal government of the United States? Shouldn't they all be strongly promoting, subsidizing perhaps, or underwriting the research to make it cheaper? Don't you think that's an important part of this issue?
I absolutely do. I think it's really central. There's a really great mechanism in place in Germany to promote wind and solar and other renewable energy systems, and it's called the acronym is EEG, but the nickname is the feed-in tariff. And what that does is, say with solar panels, you buy solar panels. Now, the thing with renewable energy is that almost all of your costs are up front, and this isn't true with in our house, like say, energy we use for our housing. If you buy a passive house, if you were to buy one of Rolf Disch's apartments, you would buy the solar panels and the passive house architecture, which is more expensive. It's about 7%, costs about 7% more. You buy that stuff up front. Now, this woman that I interviewed who lives in one of Rolf Disch's apartments, she said, she put it in a really great way. She said, there's a sort of global price of the house. And when you bought a regular conventional house, if you had to pay for all the coal energy that you were using before you moved in, or like when you bought the house, then that would be comparable. But we don't have to do that because of this infrastructure that's been built up over time. So what they've come up with, the system they've come up with in Germany is the feed-in tariff. What happens is, let's see if I can explain this simply and clearly. You buy solar panels, and solar panels are not directly subsidized the way that in some places in the United States they are. You put down the money for your solar panels, and you sign a contract with the utility. They have to buy the electricity that your solar panels generate for 20 years. Now, within about 7 or 8 years, you've paid off your solar panels. And then the rest of that time is pure profit. Now, the rate that they pay you at is double the going rate for energy. So you will make your money back, and it's a contractual agreement. Now, that money comes from all the other ratepayers. So it's not, they're not raiding the government coffers to do it. It's a €1 per kilowatt hour increase to everybody who uses energy in Germany. So, that's a system that has proven really efficient. 1 in every 100 houses has solar panels now. And, it just continues to grow. That also applies to wind and I believe to geothermal. So, and there are a number of wind farms that are going up around Freiburg as well. So, that's one option, and there are others. And just to kind of, it gets really to the question of the politics of it in the United States. I just want to throw this out there because in 2007, if anyone wants to talk about corn ethanol, feel free, because I wrote an article about that about a year ago, and one of the things I found was that in 2007, 2 out of every $3 that the government spent invested in renewable energy went to corn ethanol. The other one of those $3 went to wind, solar, geothermal, every other kind of renewable energy combined. So clearly there's a major shift in priorities that needs to happen on that level too.
I'm going to make a comment that I don't believe a lot of people really do care about the source of the things that they buy or they purchase and they use. And I work a lot with waste, and people have the myth that they can throw things away. Well, there's no away, so there's a lot of problems with that. But I think especially young people and Facebook and Twitter, and they're all into this technology and they're buying all this stuff, and most people have no thought as to the consequences of how those things are manufactured and all the damage that is done around the world, and the awful child labor that's going on, and there's terrible, terrible things so that we can have the newest cell phone and the laptop and all those things. But then there's also the tremendous energy use that those things are using that, we didn't have 20, 30 years ago. There was a hugely less energy demand because Google and Facebook, to house all the support for their, searches and everything, is using a lot of energy. It's mind-boggling how much energy that's using just so we can do our little Google search. So people have this myth that we're cleaner, we're better, this stuff's all clean, and it's just really not. And I don't know, I didn't read your book, sorry, if you've addressed that whole subject, but there's just a huge, huge educational effort that needs to go on around sort of this new economy that we're morphing into is really not any better.
Thanks for that. In terms of just quickly, in terms of the this idea that whether people care where their products come from, I know that there are a lot of people that don't, but I think that there are plenty of people that do. And what shows me that there's this idea that is constantly reinforced, and a lot of people say it to me, that we need the market because people, to solve this problem, because people really only make decisions based on self-interest. And so if there isn't something in it for them, they're not going to buy green products, or they're not going to change their ways. And my response to that is that, well, if that were the case, then there would be no such thing as an environmental movement. The very existence of the environmental movement is proof that people don't just act out of self-interest, that they act out of interests of, community, of caring about other life forms, caring about the, future generations. So I think that's something that is good to point out. And then in terms of, the disposability, the normalization of disposability. I actually write about this a lot in my first book, and which is a social political history of garbage. And one of the things I found in that is finally, I had to write another book because everybody called me the garbage lady, and I was like, okay, this has got to stop. Oh, you did? Okay. But one of the things I learned in writing that book was that the kind of disposability that we see and that seems so normal now. I mean, this is learned behavior. We have to convince them that something that is so clearly reusable should be thrown away. And there was this plastics convention. I think it was in 1955 or late 1950s. And one of the speakers says to a room full of plastic makers, he says to them, "Your future is in the garbage wagon." So it was very clear they got it. If they wanted people to buy more stuff, they had to get people to throw things away. And so this is a behavioral practice that's constantly reinforced. And you're absolutely right. We do need more education about how, as human beings, that isn't just naturally how we are. It's learned behavior, and we can learn to behave in other ways.
I'm actually interested in, I have my own set of questions, but I didn't hear that you addressed the energy use of the online searches. Do you want to answer that one?
That's not my area of expertise.
Okay, good.
But I've read some about it, and it's a really big deal. Yeah, I mean, there's this whole idea that we have this new economy and it's clean, and that that Macs and Apple products are clean, and they're not. Mm-hmm. They're full of toxic ingredients. Mm-hmm. They're full of toxic components, and the way that they're made, and then the electricity that they use. I mean, it's a big deal. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Okay. Well, my name is Minka, and I live in Cambridge, not quite 55 years. but I'm getting up there. So my first question, I'm almost afraid to ask this. So in Cambridge, we started single-stream recycling, and there's a big push to encourage people to recycle more. Here's the question I'm afraid to ask. Is there a seamy underbelly of recycling?
Why are you afraid to ask that?
Because I'm afraid you're going to say yes.
It's gonna make you sad.
Yes.
Of course there is. You know, I love it because people always ask me that. You know, they always say, you know, we put our recycling in these separate bags, and then, you know, but I think they just throw it in the garbage truck. You know, it's like this.
In Cambridge, it is, you know, we don't have
goes into
separate
the
bags.
garbage
It's in a big dump. There's a separate, I mean, it's in a big toter. There's a separate truck that picks it up. So, and I've been to the facility, the MRF, where they're separating it. So I know it goes somewhere.
Yeah.
What's the seamy underbelly?
Well, the seamy underbelly, I mean, it's different in different places. I mean, the thing with recycling is that recycling is better than not recycling. But recycling is something that treats waste after it's already been made, you know, and that's not enough. And it's you know, us recycling and taking our tote bags to the grocery store and trying to buy products that have less packaging, which is really hard to do. You know, those kinds of choices that we make matter, but they just pale in comparison to the kinds of changes that really need to happen. Mm-hmm. You know, and we're talking like big changes in terms of what kind of energy we use, production processes, you know, what kind of job, you know, what kind of like labor system are we gonna have if we stop farming industrially? You know, how are those farmers going to earn a living? If we stop using as much oil, what are all the workers out in the Gulf? You know, where are they going to work? And these are really important questions that I think we need to talk about and we need to find answers to. And you know, there are the kinds of things that you and I do, you know, like recycling and carrying around our tote bags. But and so often the discussion of environmental crisis and solutions gets like shut down to that level, and it's just amazing because there's so much more that we need to be talking about. And I know that you know this. It's like you know, this question of jobs, and then also, you know, what are the solutions? How do we solve this stuff? Campaign finance reform. We also need to transform our trade policies. You know, these are the kinds of things that are really going to matter. You know, and in terms of like trade policies, Obama wants to, you know, increase fivefold our exports. What does the United States export? It exports grain. You know, if we increase grain exports fivefold, you're talking massive amounts of industrial farming, you know, ever more increasing use of GMO seeds, you know, fertilizers. I mean, you know, this is not the guy in the White House who has an organic garden out back, you know. So these are the kinds of policies that, and the level on which I think we need to be engaging with these issues.
I'm not sure that we've quantified it, but I think one of our major exports is higher education, and you're here in Cambridge where you've got Harvard and MIT, so if we can increase that, maybe that would be good. My second question is, now I'm hoping you're going to give a good answer to this. I know that, you know, in Cambridge we are head and shoulders above many other cities in the U.S., but I'm wondering, as you've traveled the globe, are there specific towns that we should look to for good examples that maybe we could implement here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's such a great thing to do. Thank you. I think that's such a great way to go because, you know, there are people doing things on the local level that, you know, that are making a difference. And that's an example that can then be taken and used. And not everything's going to work everywhere. Not everything is interchangeable. But that's one way of keeping whatever it is you're doing from being just some kind of isolated pet project, but is to make connections with other people in other communities that are doing this stuff too. And like what people are doing in Freiburg, I mean, I think that work is pretty tremendous. And I forgot to mention this. One of the founders of Vauban was I went to interview him, and he said, okay, you know, like he's still very active in what goes on in Vauban. He was going the next day to the city hall to talk to the council members about the traffic concept, because they're constantly having to defend charging people $24,000 for a parking spot. And but he was doing a lot of work on the 2,000 Watt Society, you know, which there is this exhibition this week on that, and you know, and the idea that, you know, there's these kinds of projects going on. There's you know, like in San Francisco, there's curbside recycling for compost, or curbside compost pickup. In Florida, there are some communities that have started to try out the feed-in tariff. So there are these things happening in different places, and it's really, I think, you know, extremely, you know, has the potential for a lot of change making if those, I mean, what people like us have to do is make those connections and make new kinds of, and you know, revitalize connections that maybe were once there and have fallen away.
I'm Rolf Goetze, Cambridge, born and raised here. I'm delighted you looked at some of the German situation. I have cousins in Germany, and I'm also impressed how these things like the windmills that you see right near the cities and the ability to have solar panels seems to be part of they accept it. Here, the majority still fights windmills and so forth. My question to you, since you mentioned you're living in Brooklyn, where my son also lives, rather than Vauban, which is, I gather, new construction, you are, I would presume, living in existing housing. Do you have any thoughts how we would apply this thinking to live more efficiently in, like, the Brooklyn brownstones or whatever? How do we, because most of us live in existing housing.
Yeah. It's a very good question. Most of the housing in the United States, I think something like 4% of structures are new. So, you know, the vast majority are existing. And in many ways, that's really where the work needs to be done. We can look at what's going on in Vauban and take those techniques and apply them. So you can retrofit buildings using passive house standards. And, you know, like triple glazed windows with argon gas, and then also just really good insulation in the walls. My cousin is a home energy auditor, and something that you don't expect, and some of you may know this, but you know, most of the energy that leaves the house leaves through the walls and not the windows. And so, you know, and there's something else they do in Vauban that's really great, is all the kids in school, they learn all of the stuff I wish I knew about, you know, how many kilowatts does it take to light a, you know, house, and how much does it take, for, you know, just they understand those kinds of measurements, and they learn that as part of their math, you know, lessons in school. And so that kind of literacy would be really great, just as another suggestion of something to do on the local level. But getting back to the point, yeah, I mean, we need to retrofit. Now, something that's really great about that is that, you know, those are jobs, and those are jobs that will be here, you know, that people who are here can do, and that's a really important thing that obviously we need in the economy right now. And it's just a matter of trying to get somebody who's sane in charge of some of the money. But yeah.
Hi, my name is Steve Weinman. I'm a member of the Climate Emergency Action Group. I really appreciate you talking about the critical importance of consuming less and of rejecting a growth economy. I think you referred to it or quoted someone referring to it as insane. I have two related questions about that. The first one is how much less? I think, you know, you were talking about how hard, you know, you can read or see stuff in the news about the disasters along the Mississippi or Japan, wherever, but how hard it is to really grasp it, I think, is an analogous thing. how hard it is for us to realize and really grasp how bloated we are. U.S. is 4.5% of the world's population. We consume about 25% of the world's resources and energy. So, so that's kind of the background to my question about how much less. And the second question, again, I really appreciated you saying very directly that consuming less threatens to destroy the economy. Or, I mean, threatens really even much more serious collapse than we've seen, which is obviously a huge dilemma. I mean, it's really hard to organize around creating a depression. It's hard, it's kind of a hard thing to get people excited about. And I mean, in a funny way, it is what we need to do, but the question is how to do it without actually destroying people's lives. So I just wonder what your thoughts are about the alternatives that we need to put into place as we're consuming less and destroying the current economy.
It's a small question. Good thing I got a PhD in economics. Just kidding. So, how much is, I mean, you know, that's something that like the 2,000 Watt Society deals with, and I think I dropped off on my point earlier, but when I was interviewing Jorg Lang and Vauban, he was going to this meeting with the city council about the traffic concept, but what he's really working on now is the 2,000 Watt Society and trying to adopt that as a way of living. And, you know, what that says is that every person, if you divide the resources that we have at a consumption level that the earth can support, then everyone on earth is entitled to 2,000 watts of energy. I can't remember how often, but you know, so it's this equitable distribution, and it gets at these kinds of you know, at issues of you know, equality, and there's all kinds of issues of justice, and we've seen these things come up a lot, especially, you know, sort of peaking at the 2009 climate talks in Copenhagen, you know, this idea of climate justice as being really key to all of this. It's not just about, you know, it's interesting because, like, Obama saying, you know, we can't sign, you know, carbon reduction plans because the Chinese won't sign it, and, you know, we can't, you know, it's this line they've been using forever. You know, we all need to be on board. This is a global problem. And you have these very tough questions of development in places like China and India and all over in most of the world. You know, are these people allowed to have a good standard of living, or do we just, you know, do they have to just stop and everyone cuts their emissions and their consumption, you know, everyone all at once. Meantime, we get all of the benefits of the development that we've been able to enjoy thanks to fossil fuels. And something that, you know, that in talking to Jorg Lang that I learned was just that if we, you know, can allow there to be scaling back in the consumption that we do in developed countries, and like I said earlier, not in a way that hinders our comfort in life, and not in a way that makes us suffer, and not in a way that denies the fact that we have, you know, sensual desires, and that we like pretty things, and, you know, that kind of stuff is important. You know, but if we can scale our consumption levels to a more realistic place, then there is room for other people in other places to have a higher standard of living at the same time. And, you know, what those exact numbers are, I don't know. But I think that, you know, it depends on where you're coming from. I mean, people's definitions of environmentalism vary tremendously, you know. So that can be a goal, a kind of creating a world that is more equitable on a very deep level, or cutting CO2 emissions. You know, I mean, you can sort of take it from from these very, really treating the kind of symptoms, of like, maybe we cut CO2 emissions by building a bunch of nuclear power plants, or maybe we cut CO2 emissions by reducing the amount of energy we use by retrofitting the buildings that we live in and building mass transit systems and eating, locally and seasonally, or, there's just so many different ways to interpret how to reduce consumption. And those are, and then again, what are the impacts of that on jobs? And how do we transition from where we are to where we want to be in a way that is equitable for people who rely on those industries for their income? So I think there's a lot of really good questions and dialogues to have about that.
My name is Elie Yarden. I live in Cambridge. I've lived in Cambridge for a long time. I have no problems at all avoiding buying organic pears from Argentina when I go into the Whole Foods. I have no impulse to do that. I have every reason to avoid it. That doesn't help me very much. And I am fond of making distinctions. I am not an environmentalist, but as a pre-engineering student, many years ago at UCLA, I and some of my friends developed the capacity for ecological thinking, which is a very, very different thing. Now, I also had the advantage, rather later than many of my peers, of reading Veblen, who wrote 110 years ago in The Theory of the Leisure Class, invented and made popular the concept of conspicuous consumption as a good, as an economic good. My real problem is this. My government is totally against me. What do I do about it? I live under a government which is committed to the necessity of waste. It is committed to the necessity of jobs. Everything that can be produced under current technologies with half the energy that is consumed in those processes would not require the average work week to be more than 20 hours. But for some reason or another, the growth economy imposes not only additional hours of work, but more workers per family. The idea of growth is one which I not only fail to understand, but it is devastating to my humanity, because the only energy worthwhile is the energy which does not come from my body and the use of my hands to make things. You use the example of Germany. Germany, almost 40% of the GDP, to use that ridiculous measure, goes to taxation. In the United States, it's at best 15 to 16% of all taxation. The insistence on waste is in our education, it's in our public schools. The amount of money that the API devotes to education, starting from kindergarten or preschool through graduate school, is rather remarkable. The API, for those who don't know what it is the American Petroleum Institute, 400 corporations. Why is it not possible for me to demand of my government that get rid of cheap energy? It demeans me. Why cannot energy be taxed at its real cost? That alone would rid the country of poverty. Tax energy at its, instead of pursuing this chimera of cheap energy, recognize what it costs ecologically. How do we do it? How do we stop the government from defeating us? Thank you.
Well, perhaps this question continues on with that position. I believe that about half of our tax dollars, or maybe even up to 60%, go to the Pentagon, go to defense. And as Lester Brown has pointed out very clearly, the terrorism that we're supposedly fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, which we know was never terrorism that was really something we really needed to defend, is going to be much, much worse in the future with food insecurity. So right now we're wasting how many trillions of dollars, which could be going into changing over to renewables. So I'm wondering, I mean, I know your book obviously can't cover everything, but I'm wondering, what have you discovered in other countries? Does Germany, for instance, put some huge amount also into the military, and is that a huge proportion of their working class people who are going into the military because there are no jobs in public and private sectors, or is it completely different in a country like Germany? And what ideas might you have for us to really have a peacetime, eventually have a peacetime economy that would be for sustaining the planet rather than destroying? Because as we all know, the environment is totally destroyed by the bombs that we're dropping. I've lived in El Salvador, which was a scorched earth policy in the 1980s, and it was totally deforested. And right now we can see what the people have done. They've replanted trees, and it's green, and the people are working locally to, to produce food for themselves. But the United States paid for and trained and took the bombs and the planes and everything to El Salvador to destroy all that in the 1980s. And we're doing that again, of course, in Afghanistan and Iraq. So I'm, just wondering what your thoughts might be on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just in terms of, no country invests anywhere near the amount of money that the United States does in their military. I can't remember exactly the number. I'm sure some of you here do, but the U.S. Military budget is more than all other countries combined, right? So, yeah, it's a very different equation in Germany. But just quickly on the Germany question, we keep talking about it. A big reason why they have the energy policies that they do is because of activists who have demanded it. And it gets tricky to try to pull it apart and say, okay, wait, where did all this start? Because it isn't just activists that created the policies that are phasing out nuclear energy that Angela Merkel is trying to undermine, but I think after Japan will not be able to. They're supposed to phase out all their nuclear power plants by 2020. And so that came about because of a whole bunch of protests in the 70s against nuclear power plants. And that sort of set the stage for it. And a major one of those protests happened just outside of Freiburg. And Rolf Disch and a number of these other people that worked on Vauban were at those protests. And that's what helped them understand what kind of future they wanted to make. And so, then the Green Party comes together in the late 1970s, early 1980s, and then Chernobyl happens, right? So 1986, you've got a radioactive cloud hanging over much of Europe and hanging over Vauban. And I talked to people who had to leave the area. Mothers would form groups, and they would go out of the area to get food for their kids. And also, something else that happened, was that much of Germany was destroyed in the war. And the town of Freiburg huge parts of Freiburg were just totally destroyed. And the consciousness that created in people who are still alive about potential, again, this gets to that point of abstraction and reality and being able to understand what real destruction is like to live in, real crisis. And I think that was, it was this confluence of all of these factors that came together. And how do you make that happen in terms of, shifting where we spend our money? I mean, it's so complex. Yeah.
A week ago, I was here at the Cambridge Forum and heard Ralph Nader, who also was talking about all those kind of things as well. And he also said what you started off with, which was about just getting active in your local community. And I really think that's a big problem. It's too diffuse, and there's so many problems that I think people are overwhelmed, and if everybody just does what they get into in their own local community, we don't have that political force to make those bigger changes. So I'm wondering, I heard Ralph Nader saying a lot of similar things a week ago. You know, are you guys talking together about trying to, you know, get things really moving here instead of just all this little feel-good stuff that people do in their communities? I don't know. So.
Well, hopefully, well, like I said, he won't return my calls, but the other thing is that I mean, that's a joke, but I did try to call him for an interview. I've tried to call him a couple times for interviews, but I haven't got a phone call back. But anyway, no, I mean, look, the fact is that the actions that we make on, you know, whether you're doing community organizing or you're working with an advocacy group or you're, you know, lobbying, you're a member of Congress, or you're working for a biotech company, you know, like there's just so many levels that you can be working on, and I think that all of them matter.
But I think he said, and you just said too, it was people in the streets in the 70s. That's what did it. That's what created some change. And we're not doing that. And I don't know. I think people need to get together and get out there in the street. I don't know.
Well, we have a whole series of activities this coming week that we hope to see you participate in. The question of whether you have to be on the street nowadays is an open one, but it seems to me that some level of commitment and engagement is what, in fact, this whole committee is about, so we welcome it. Yes?
Susan Abbott from Needham, and happy to be in Cambridge this evening. This is a little history of my being organic. First of all, I bought organic things so that the soil would be cured, so that there'd be no pesticides and things like that. Then I bought organic so that the market would be developed and people would have jobs growing organic foods. Then the President's panel on cancer recently released said one of the highlights was eat organic and keep your health. In our newspapers anyway, that was the little blurb that summed it all up. I've recently been with listening to Theo Colborn, who's a toxicologist, and she said that she was not worried about climate change at all. She was much more worried about the fertility and the sterility and the autisms that are presented more and more in number each year, and that's why she eats organically. But she said that we've been poisoning ourselves since about 1945, and with how we make things, what we release into the air, pesticides, and no one seems to have absorbed this fact, and I would think somehow, because the first people who identified that there were problems with frogs, alligators, and whales, etc., were all environmentalists. But there seems to be no connection between environmental change and environmentalism to save our health. Do you have any comments?
You brought up a lot of points there. One thing, yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people do eat organically because they're worried about their own health. And a lot of people in the industry will say that's why people eat organically. And I know that it's not the only reason why. It's one of the reasons why I eat organic when I can afford it. Yeah, honestly, it is. But I also do eat organically for environmental reasons. I thought it was interesting the way that you wrote down your history of eating organic, because I think the organic food sector is a really good example of seeing what happens when, when you do something like this over time, but you don't make we don't make more fundamental changes. What ends up happening, like I described, that deforestation that's going on in Paraguay that I saw, organic isn't transforming the industrial food system. The industrial food system is transforming what is organic. And so we end up like reinventing the wheel. We're still paying really high prices for organic. I remember when I was a kid, my mom had a health food store for a minute and in Texas, and everybody was like, what? But I remember the food was really expensive, and I remember my mom saying, don't worry, like the more people eat this stuff, the more it'll become affordable. And that hasn't happened, So, and there are market reasons why it hasn't happened. I think there are pretty clear explanations. I feel like I'm not totally answering your question, but there's one other point that what you said made me think about, which is that there's all these studies about the nutritional value of organic versus conventional food. And they all say, like, you can't prove, defenders of conventional farming will say, you can't prove that organic food is more nutritious. And I finally realized that these studies, they don't study the pesticides and fertilizer chemicals. They don't test for that. So when it's very confusing. And I found that out just as I was finishing my book. And I was like, what? There's all kinds of ways that we're misled about it. And yeah, toxic substances in what we eat are obviously very dangerous for both the people and other living life forms.
One more question, then we'll proceed to the book signing.
Well, this is a very simple one. Many questions ago, Minka asked you a question, and she said she was afraid of the answer. And she was asking you about the seamy underbelly. You had so many wonderful things to say about Freiburg. Is there a seamy underbelly to Freiburg, or is it really a wonderful example of everything that we should be following?
Well, I'm sure, there's a steamy underbelly to everything. I mean, really.
Said anything about it?
The people were mean. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, one of the problems with it is that it's all new construction, and that's not like real life, and I mean, I don't know that, it's so funny that you asked me that, because everybody's like, tell me something good for once.
And you did, but you were telling us the downside of everything else, so I was afraid. The other shoe didn't drop yet,
Yeah, I mean, another thing is that, it is mixed income, but it's important to remember that Germany is one of the wealthiest countries on the planet. And so it's mixed income in that specific, in that very privileged context. And so that doesn't mean that, again, a single mother with 2 jobs is going to be able to afford to live there. And that's a really big deal, in my opinion.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Excuse me, I just have to tell you, this gentleman feels you did not answer his question, and it was not intended to be rhetorical.
Oh, you were so eloquent.
No, it was not rhetorical. It was about the fact that if I go before the Board of Zoning Appeal, when NSTAR wants to double the carrying capacity of one of its power lines, and therefore has to build a new cooling system across the street from me, I count for nothing. I say, my only question is, what do we do about a government that is against us? And I meant the question very seriously,
Okay.
because that is the issue. And I wish you would address it.
Okay. Well, it's a very big question. And, what do we do about a government that's against us? I mean, that's something that I think, people have been struggling with for generation upon generation. And, just to sort of bring it back to why we're here tonight, I mean, not to oversimplify it by any stretch of the imagination, but, for there to be change in the government, a lot of people say, well, they don't change because of a lack of political will. And when I was writing my book, I was like, what is political will? Where does political will come from? Because it's really easy for me to say, Obama didn't come to any kind of climate agreement in 2009 because of a lack of political will. Actually, I think he has political will. I just think that his political will is more sympathetic with, say, ExxonMobil than with us. And, but where does political will come from? It comes really from public will, ideally. And to get a government that's not against you means having a government that is democratic, that is truly democratic. And again, we get back to this question of campaign finance reform, and if we don't get some kind of control over, I don't know if I can say this, but what the hell is going on in the White House and locally, there's no way that we're going to be able to make, the kinds of changes that I think a lot of us understand need to happen, and also that we are truly, our voices need to be heard, and that doesn't happen enough. It doesn't happen very much, and it's important, I think, for us to understand and figure out how to generate that public will. I think that's a really important place for us to start. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. Heather Rogers. You've been listening to the Cambridge Forum, co-sponsored by the Cambridge Climate Emergency Action Group and the Climate Justice Task Force of the First Parish in Cambridge, Unitarian Universalist, the Lowell Institute, and the Friends of Cambridge Forum. For more information about this program or the Cambridge Forum programs in general, recorded this case in May 2011, please check out our website, cambridgeforum.org. In Harvard Square, I'm Tim Weiskell. Thanks for joining us.